Welcome, everybody, to the forecast discussion for 2022 and 23, the remaining 2 years of transition. My name is Jona Bryndis. I'm a healer, energy coach, and therapist. And I am going to illuminate these energies here that are affecting all of us with a little more awareness. So my job is to talk about these things that we are already feeling. If you are energetically sensitive or an empath, you have probably already figured this out, that what you are perceiving is always a little prior to how the entire collective perceives it. And so it's easy for me as this coach that works with energetically sensitives and empaths, does energy sessions every day, to report about those energies. I'm reporting. I'm not even predicting from my point of view. And I want to say a few words about these years to come, 22, 23, in conjunction with my own work. So for the last 15 years, I have been talking about what is there to come. And we are now basically concluding, fulfilling the program of what I have been talking about for the last 15 years. That is the emergence of global shadow, that is sacred self-healing, and so many things that are, I guess, summarized as awakening here in this way of contextualizing things, not as a mystical or spiritual occurrence, but as an evolution of our consciousness, as an evolutionary step into a new reality. This is basically the way I contextualize things and how I offer to look at what we perceive as reality. So as I'm saying that we are concluding a program, what I mean with that is that there hasn't really been a lot of change in these last 20 years from my point of view. There has only been an unfolding. The unique thing about these next years is that we have now officially entered a new era, a zeitgeist era, coming from the German word Zeitgeist, which is basically, from a spiritual point of view, a new reign. There's a new sort of overall context for this next 20-year cycle. And we're already in this, and to do this as a collective, we always have to go through a certain level of transition. So we are transiting into this new era. And if you are part of my audience, then you know this. I have been talking and writing about this for ages. So for me, it's more or less just a recapitulating and summarizing of all these things that have been unfolding in the last 20 years. And for this reason, I want to divide this forecast discussion into 3 segments. One has to do with your questions in regards to the future, in regards to collective energies. I would like to start out with that. What are some of these burning questions, these unknowns that you would like to know more about, or where you would like to get cues as to what you need to feel into? The second segment is the summarization of that, and I have produced something last year that I have posted in the forecast for 21, 22, and 23. All these lists, these inoculation list and the Zeitgeist era list of new terms and developments that are going to come to play is still valid. So I want to go through those with you, and in view of the most recent discoveries here in this last year, you will probably see, even if you've watched the forecast from a year ago, you will probably see these words now with a different perspective. So I'm posting this for you here in the chat for you live audience, and if you're watching this video on YouTube, you'll see this here on the other side of me. These challenges and opportunities and these new terms that we are dealing with, those are things that are in the air, if you will, for the last 20 years. They are just now coming to our awareness, to our collective awareness. The next 20 years are new zeitgeist developments, and this is the preparation for this. So I would like to start with you by answering your questions. And they can be simple, they can be complex. You know this about the way I teach things is to look at it from a 5-dimensional standpoint, yeah, to see everything as part of a physical reality, emotional reality, mental, intellectual reality, spiritual reality, and energetic reality. You can ask any question in regards to the future. Let's maybe reduce it to the next 20 years. Okay, that's as much as we can process cognitively, because we have a limited lifespan. We only live roughly 80 years, and so we don't really look into what's going to happen in 1,000 years or a million years. That's not interesting for our psyche. What are some of these questions? Who would like to?
I'd like to ask a question.
More about the future, where our collective is headed, where our planet is headed, and what these new developments will bring to us. You can also type your question in the comments. I will answer them later. The audio. Is anybody asking anything?
Yes, I was asking something, Jona.
I apologize. Go ahead.
This is Abigail. My question may sound a little dramatic, but like in the kind of 20 years scope, will humans be living in some kind of slave camp? Like, is kind of the general situation for humans going to get worse, and we're going to kind of lose more of our liberties and end up in some kind of giant slave camp, something like that?
Okay, so let's analyze the question for a sec. I get where you're coming from. There's no problem with that. But let's look at what's behind that. What you are inquiring about is whether there is going to be something like a globalistic ruling class, right? Because that's kind of behind the question. Yeah. In order for us as collective to live in some kind of contained structure, okay, there's got to be somebody who puts this structure in place. Correct? Is that where you're coming from with this question? So you have you have to investigate that. Okay? To answer that question, you have to first ask, who could this be? Who or what could this be? All right, and is this something that we are perhaps already seeing tendencies? Yeah, and what are those tendencies? But I do want to answer your question with a second question. Who says we're not already living like that? Who says we're not already living in something that is contained, that may not appear that way on the outside, yeah, in the physical reality, but that is already happening, or has already happened or has been happening for a while, as far as our emotional, mental, and spiritual reality is concerned. When you investigate questions from that perspective, you will notice one thing, and that is really what I can predict with 100% certainty, is that there is a perception war going on, and yes, there is an enslavement of our perception, and that is already going on. So the answer to your question is yes, but not in the way you've asked it. Because when we think of enslavement camps, we're thinking of Guantanamo Bay or the Nazi concentration camps or gulags, in Russia, right? We're thinking of it as a physical reality. The truth is way worse in that sense, because when our perception is contained, when our perception is enslaved, then that kind of enslavement happens on a level of how we actually perceive our reality. And this is the reason why I've called these 3 years, I've christened them basically, reality wars. We are in the middle of a war, except for that war isn't taking place in the physical. And this is where it messes with our perception of things, and where, we have a tendency to mystify. If you see the world like I see the world, from an energetic point of view, all right, where I recognize the dynamics of people's psyches, and I can verify this through the trained perception that I have, that allows me to see people simultaneously in their physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and etheric reality. Yeah, for anyone who has explored that, and perhaps even trained that with me, as many of you know, I'm offering lots of training courses on this really out there techniques, then you can already see that. It's already there. And yes, I'm looking at your comments here. Orwell's 1984. Orwell's 1984 was limited through the perception that George Orwell had at that time. When was that? When that book was written? I think in the 50s or 40s, I'm not sure. He could only imagine what he could imagine. And in his imagination, in his perception, it would take place in this physical sense. And we do see remnants of that. We do see this big brother reality. Yeah, we see that today, that was brought to us, with a perk, with a little breadcrumb, and that is through social media. So we see that there is something that has invaded our reality here in these last 15 years. 1949. Thank you, Aneta. That is creating such a George Orwell reality without us realizing it. There's other authors and movies, for example, V for Vendetta has elements of that. And one of the most cited movies now, back into our social awareness through the latest release of Part 4, the Matrix movie, have picked up on that very same perception, namely that there is an enslavement already going on, and that it happens without our awareness. And how is that possible? It is possible because we don't recognize what it actually is that is being enslaved. We don't recognize what is being harvested here. We think of ourselves only as this material, physical being, and therefore our focus is on our physical body alone. What we don't realize, and that has to do with our limited perception, is that the true resource in us humans is actually the power of our consciousness. And the power of our consciousness is the most valuable resource in this universe. You might not understand this fully yet, but this enslavement is already going on. Very good question. Yes, Syria is commenting here exactly. We're in prison already. Only most do not understand that they were treated like slaves, and worse, they themselves behave like slaves. Yes. For all this sort of globalistic imprisonment and enslavement camp to work out, guys, it is important when you look at the number of people on this planet, 7.5 billion, roughly, give or take, people, that they enslave themselves. They have to basically do this voluntarily, otherwise this wouldn't work. It's too many people to control. Yeah, you cannot put 7.5 billion people into an enslavement camp. The structure that you would need to build for that on a physical plane is too big. It is a lot easier to enslave people through their minds and their emotions and through their energies. So with this question, Abigail, you have actually given me the segue into helping you guys all understand what this new era must be about, namely the liberation of that. And what is it that needs to be liberated? What is it that needs to be healed, that needs to be revealed? Do you see this now? Awakening is not some woo-woo special kumbaya, beautiful, the end of all suffering experience. Awakening is basically a harsh awakening to this reality, namely that our emotional, mental, even our spiritual and energetic energies have been misused, have been imprisoned, have been harvested all along. Yes, and it's not so much the mind itself, Tina Marie, it is all that comes with it. So when you understand the human nature, the nature of the human psyche, and there are some very famous examples just in the last century of people who knew exactly what they're doing by hijacking the psyche of humans through, and this is not my political opinion, this is a scientific word, propaganda and mind control. At around the same time, so like 80, 90 years ago, we all know the famous example from Goebbels in Germany. There were lots of books written about how to hijack a human through their mind, their visual and their emotional impact. And the sort of whole marketing movement in capitalism has, and the same in communism also, propaganda has been used by all systems, by all ruling systems really, were put in place to mess with our perception. And that is what has been going on for, I would say, thousands of years already, just depending on the technology that was available at a certain time in a certain era. Needed to be more physical in the old days. In the new days, it is basically done through social media itself, if you will. The external reality that we buy into via our perception of ourselves, the world, and how other people see us. What used to be some kind of religious dogma now is a media dogma. And this year, 21, was the ultimate revelation of that, brought to us by the COVID crisis, if you will. It has never been that obvious, at least to the majority of people, or, well, it's not the majority yet who's actually seeing this clearly, how controversial and how untrue things are. according to research, 80% or 85% actually of the information on the internet as a total is untrue. And if you just do this as a sort of a conservative estimate, all right, it means that pretty much 9 out of 10 articles are untrue. And we have an issue with the fact checkers now because fact checking has been the new trend, right? The problem with the fact checking is that the fact checking is done by these same institutions that put this untrue information out there. And what makes it even more tricky is that these institutions aren't actually aware how the information that they're putting out there is not true. So the individuals, the journalists, the people that are hired to fact check, they're completely unaware of the fact that they are becoming more or less agents of that very darkness, of that very untruth that they are trying to prevent. This is very twisted, guys, and not actually that complicated. It's just twisted, which means you have to, and this is not possible. We know this through other examples, for example, trying to understand a serial killer or trying to understand a narcissist. You will never be able to fully understand this, what is going on in a person that doesn't have empathy, that doesn't have that human nature. Okay, now you would probably ask, well, what am I saying here? That there's like humans and non-humans on this planet? No, that's not what I'm saying. So this is the whole alien the agenda, that people interpret into this. It's really difficult for us to contextualize this without bringing external forces into, how this is playing out. It is simply in that the way this happens is simply in the way that individuals' mindsets, individuals' perceptions can be hijacked in a way that we would know from psychology through delusions and hallucinations, that they are truly believing in what they are seeing and what they perceive as truth. And so a lot of times it is not very simple, or it's not so simple to determine where what is coming from and who is actually the origin and who is just the agent or sort of the outer layer, the person that brings it into expression. Many of you have read my articles in which I keep on talking about how our psyche is being hijacked and how that is something that we need to pay attention to as the first and foremost task of healing, of growth and evolution, and not how much money, how much anti-aging, or how much social status we can gain. Social status, money, and some kind of outer form is basically the way this happens in us, namely that we get fixated on the material only. All right, and even with more complex subjects such as climate change, social emotional learning, and so forth, spirituality, the actual consciousness of people has been hijacked already. So you hear me a lot talk about New Age traps, how it's actually hijacking people's spiritual energies, and with it their emotional and mental capacities. All right, you hear me a lot talk about etheric abuse. If you don't know anything about this, here check the playlist on my YouTube channel. There's 6 hours of workshops about etheric abuse only, and etheric protection and our etheric immune system and so forth, how we can learn to discern and protect ourselves. So advertising is used all the time, and advertising is basically you're asking me, the mother of all deceptions. Yeah, and the interesting part about this, and why I call this twisted, is we all know it. We all know that advertising isn't true, that it isn't real. And yet, we allow it to hijack our emotions and our perception of ourselves. Yeah. Yes, Kirk, here, for you, it helps you to totally ignore media on all levels. Yes, it is, however, and this is something that most don't understand, quite important to be in the here and now and to understand what the majority of people around you perceive as their reality. So I think it's important to inform ourselves. The liberation happens in the sense that you pick the sources and that you investigate all information that comes in so that you become able to know the difference between truth and untruth. For the last year, I have been calling all these struggles that are ahead of us the confrontation with untruth. And yeah, I don't know. It makes more sense now, does it? Yeah. So for us to evolve, for us to grow, and for us to heal, collectively and individually, we need to confront ourselves with untruth, and with it all these paradigms of deception, yeah, that we have so willingly accepted as our reality. So the confrontation with untruth here in this, within this COVID crisis, has brought the confrontation with fear, the fear of dying, here for nearly 2 years now. Yeah, and it has forced some of us into new lifestyles, new jobs, maybe new places to live, new relationships, rethinking, reevaluating how we are conducting our life. And this may have come about as a crisis, maybe as a loss, maybe as a scare, maybe you have gone through hardships in the process of that confrontation with untruth that brought about fear. But it has also brought in resilience. It has also brought in a new teaching for you. And that is that there is a power in you that can carry you through that. And that power can transcend all fears and all delusions. We call this consciousness. Your consciousness is a power that allows you, via thinking, sensing, emoting, and feeling through yourself, what your reality is presenting to you. And it may have been forced for many of you. You may have felt that it was like a punishment almost, or that you got victimized. But I do want you to understand that that is the illusion. You did not get punished for anything. You did not experience this hardship because you're not good enough. You experienced this hardship because you couldn't see clearly. And so these next 2 years of transformation, this transiting into a new era, require us to do this voluntarily, to stop being silently complicit with this enslavement, Abigail, that you brought in here, to liberate ourselves from these false perceptions of reality and ourselves, and to step into the power of our own consciousness. And that's then ultimately what you could call awakening. It is the ability to think and emote and sense for yourself. To to pierce through the veil of illusion, Maya. So that's the big theme here for the next 20 years. But these 2 more years of transformation until we will basically find a new reality, in 2024, require us to actively step into that and to choose to liberate ourselves. Remember, this enslavement, this perception war that is going on can only happen if you agree to it. The problem with the agreeing to it is that you weren't aware that you have been agreeing to it. It was a silent complicity. And so now your job is to make a conscious choice. Now I sound like a broken record because I constantly use this word, conscious choice. This has to do with me understanding the power of words and the power of language. It's a code, a conscious choice. Here's a new question. How many do you think are going to wake up, percentage-wise? At this very moment, I think, let's start where we're at. At this very moment, I think what we're seeing is sort of an 85-15 ratio. So we have a 15% of the Western world. I cannot speak, obviously, for the worlds that are not really part of any kind of research. Tribal societies, indigenous, and people who simply don't participate in this globalist kind of reality. So there's still a significant amount of people who are just simply not part of that. But let's say the Western world, 15% have something like an inkling that there is something wrong. It doesn't mean that all these 15% at this very moment are fully awoken. They may still believe in some of the deceptions of wokeness. I've talked about this as well. There's a video talking about the difference between being awake and woke. All right. So there's deceptions within deceptions. You see, this is why it's so difficult sometimes to recognize this on the first sight, because the awakening process is not sort of an on-off switch. It's a process, not an event. And so we have 15% of people right now that are realizing something ain't right. And you watching me right now here means that you are at least part of these 15%. As for the future, Tina, the future will need, all of us will need at least 85% to be awoken. All right? But for that process to happen, we only need, and that's my personal estimate, 2% of people to be fully awake, to really know what they're doing, and to understand that the purpose of all this hardship and all this confrontation with untruth is to lead us into this evolutionary step of higher consciousness. In other words, people that are visible, that are out there like myself, who help others, who assist others in that transition process by allowing them to contextualize it in a different way. And not all of us out here on the internet are fully awoken. Not all of us have the training to contextualize this. The truth is, this spiritual awakening is actually a very, very well investigated science. The Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, those are the forerunners of this. Epistemology, is a science, guys. The science of consciousness. It is not something mystical. It includes the mystical. but it isn't mystical. It can be learned. It can be trained. There's a system to this. And so to answer your question, Tina Marie, it's already happening, and ultimately we are moving into this as our greater future. Okay, so let's say maybe in 100 years from now. All right. But the getting there happens in these smaller cycles, just like how the developmental stages of our personal life happens in certain segments. For most people, it happens sort of in 7-year segments. And so we are experiencing a speeding up of these cycles simply due to the technology that we have available. And the next 20 years will bring in, a new era that will confront us basically with all the outcroppings of what has been there in the last, I want to say 100 years. Okay, so it's a cleanup process. It only requires 2% of the human population to be fully conscious, because a higher consciousness level creates a higher vibration, and a higher vibration can compensate for a lower vibration. But from recovery work, we know that the willingness of people to step out of their illusion requires a certain type of rock bottom, a certain type of cathartic experience, a crisis, if you will, or true self-intervention, as I called it. A certain fulfillment of a karmic cycle. And for that to unravel, Tina, it's going to take a little while. This is very inert when it comes to the collective. Now, when it comes to our personal transformations, and that is something that I would like to discuss here with you as the third segment of this forecast discussion. Our personal transformations do not have to coincide with these collective transformations. We can step out of this. So for every person who liberates themselves out of that prison of that perceptionary prison, okay, we can create a new reality for ourselves. So I'm looking at some of your questions. There's a lot of questions. I probably won't be able to answer them all. Yes, it's all part of this human evolution, the different stages of human evolution. And we're going to end up there, no matter what. It's just a question of, how we actually, decide, to go through this. If we want to relapse 20 times and go through everyday Groundhog Day, or if we are willing, to step into a more active life view and consciously choose what we want to experience. Interesting. Somebody turned off my video. Okay, let's not mystify. All right, let's go ahead and keep talking here. There's a lot of questions coming in here in regards to artificial intelligence. What about widespread artificial intelligence? Could that do damage to the wake up or help? AI, is that the end of humans? Nothing is the end of humans, guys. There is something in us that is way more resilient than it appears. Okay, and the reason why we can't fathom that yet is because we believe that we are only in the physical. So as soon as you are implying that you are actually a spiritual being, that you are a living, breathing consciousness, yes, a soul that just happens to have a physical body, then you understand that this consciousness energy that we have can't just poof away. Even, let's say, if this planet would get eradicated overnight. So that is not going to happen. What we need to recognize here is that artificial intelligence is part of our evolutionary process. So it is, the human obsession with overcoming the fear of death, okay, that is driving us into trying to find ways to make our consciousness replicatable, or to make our consciousness immortal. And that's what's driving artificial intelligence. You have to understand that. So until we are kind of through this cycle with artificial intelligence, we will not be able to stop the shadow aspects of that. There's a shadow aspect to artificial intelligence, of course, just like how we find this with every new technology that is coming in, okay? And so you have to recognize that what you are experiencing as a danger is your consciousness already informing you about this, but you cannot really stop that from happening. Yeah, for everybody to recognize that, we have to go through the diseases of that, just like how we had to experience this with social media. Yeah, so yes, of course, artificial intelligence is something that is very worrisome, just like how TV was worrisome, and internet and social media and now cryptos and blockchain are very worrisome. But it is not something that we can stop, because it's driven by the human ego, by the collective shadow, if you will. So we have to go through this to understand that that is not the way, to overcome our crisis in faith, really. Because if you think about it, wanting to overcome the fear of dying, the drive to find different ways or different forms of immortality is a crisis of faith, because we already are an immortal spiritual being or energy, if you will. All right, so it's just our fixation on the physical that makes it difficult for us to fully grasp that. And when you understand it from that perspective, you can see that all we really need to learn here in the process is to tune into that and strengthen that awareness, that conscious awareness in us, so that we can recognize that stuff like, how to transfer my consciousness and all my memories and all my experience to a computer, so that when I clone myself, I can download all that back into my recreated body. I mean, this is sick and twisted, right? But it comes from a very limited perspective on life, namely that life is, limited to 3D, to the physical, emotional and mental reality. And for any one of you who has already explored the rabbit hole, if you will, it is already clear that we are not just a 3D. Yeah, that is just a small part of us, and that part that drives all that, our consciousness, or our soul, if you will, that records everything anyway. It records it through eons. Okay, and this is what we then experience as our karmic task, or karmic experiences, or karmic cycles. The repeats, the deja vus, and the the remembrance of something in us. So there's many different ways how I can contextualize this for you. If I contextualize this for you in a more spiritual sense, then I would call this consciousness evolution. That, as a process of training. And what kind of training? What's the goal of this training? We are all basically angels in training, gods in training. And if you, by the way, we have this going on right now, the 12 days of sacred self. If you look at the videos or come to the live meditations here on this very channel, then you can learn a little bit more about these different hierarchies in the spiritual world. That these dimensions that exist there, and how our journey here in 3D is really just prep work. It's really just prep work in overcoming the limitations of the physical. Yeah, and that the actual goal for us is to become a higher developed spiritual being, if you will. And from all I know, from all the studies that I have done of spiritual scripture, the next level of being is something like an angelic existence, okay, where we may choose to support others, yeah, maybe in the form of becoming a guardian angel, yeah, or becoming, in general, just supporting spirit beings for people that are in a lower developmental stage, just like how we in 3D would become mentors for younger people. Yeah, so yeah, that's food for thought here, guys. If you look at things from the perspective of a larger view of things, then you will realize that our fear of physical death is kind of pity. Okay, it's very self-obsessed and doesn't really matter in the bigger scope of things. It really doesn't matter. But it is part of our 3D reality, and due to the power of our consciousness, we can overcome this illusion that we are only 3D. But we have to work on it. Overall, the human collective, human means 3D, right, is in the process of transcending 3D altogether. So we're looking at the human body today as really the highest level of physical development, evolutionarily, okay? And, the next level, and this is why energy work and consciousness work are the next technologies, yeah, is to learn how we can vibrate faster in these physical bodies. And this is basically the transformation and also the transformation pain that we are going through, namely allowing our bodies to vibrate on these higher vibratory levels, yes, so that we can transcend the physical body altogether. But does this mean that we can ignore the physical body while we're still in it? No, absolutely not. Everyone who wakes up every morning, which is all of us, knows that. No matter what your spiritual understanding and your consciousness and your life view is, or your faith, doesn't matter. You wake up in this physical body here for as long as you have this 3D experience. And all we can do is to bring in the highest expression of that. We will all die trying, guys. Our bodies will die trying to come into our highest expression here in 3D. Just so that we can evolve on this overall spiritual or, etheric level, yeah, that drives us into an even higher dimensional state. I'm looking at your questions here and your texts and your comments. Yes, very beautiful. Is there a karmic component in the situation that we're all experiencing? Of course, there always is. I've just basically laid out the karmic component. The karmic component is that you need to overcome the delusions of mortality. That's karmic. It's the larger karma, the collective karma. Yes, to be able to face any challenge, no matter how intense. Becoming capable of holding the light of truth. Yes, so this is really what has to do. That has to do with this transformation, because we actually have to increase the capacity of our own container here in 3D, yeah, to hold higher levels of truth. Nutrition is a bit of a worry. Could damage health severely. Well, yeah, it's not a worry. It's known that this is an awareness that has been there for at least 40 years, Tina Marie. Okay, so in order for our bodies to actually become able to hold these higher levels of vibration, nutrition plays a major role. A major role. I've written and talked about this for the last 30 years. Yeah, and why it is so important to take care of our body and to feed it with a more high vibrational diet. High vibrational living, guys, is a whole new way of living, and this is what we're looking at here now. We're in the middle of this transition. And what has this last year taught us? That this externalized way of looking at ourselves and our health, yeah, and externalizing the power of healing, yeah, to like vaccines or doctors or hospitals or whatever books, doesn't work. We have to take this into our own hands. We have to step into our self-health authority. We have to step into really discerning what we're ingesting on all levels. Physically, that means, nutritionally, food-wise. Yeah, emotionally, what kind of people we're surrounding ourselves, what kind of emotions we're putting out, yeah, every day. If you wake up and you're like, oh, my life is so hard and this is so hard, what kind of emotion are you putting out and basically feeding yourself back in that feedback loop? Yeah, that, negativity, okay? And then your thoughts, okay, if you stuck in your ruminating and critical inner thoughts, what kind of mental energy are you putting out there? Oh, that is all, others that are doing this and everything out there is hostile and it's wrong, they're wrong, and I'm getting victimized. Really? You think that's good food for a high vibrational existence? What are you creating spiritually when you think that you don't deserve God's love or that you're not good enough for the divine or for enlightenment? Really? That's not a higher capacity, guys. That's a lower capacity. You feeding yourselves with junk food. And New Age is a perfect example for spiritual junk food. It's a shortcut. It's the lazy way. Oh, we just all have to hold hands and sing Kumbaya together and then we don't need to do anything. That's laziness. That's passivity. Reading one book after another, running to one workshop after another, that's consumption. That's consuming spirituality. That's not really working with it. So you see, it's really easy for me to predict the future because I know what the problem is today. And so, yes, it will naturally do that. For me as a visionary, where these things come in sort of 20 years prior, this is my third cycle in my lifetime that I'm going through of predicting what comes next. I've predicted the internet and, all that comes with it. I've predicted the nutritional crisis and the propaganda and, the pharmaceutical problems. Yeah, and I've been predicting the collapse of the money system and the reintroduction of a new money system, which is imminent, for the last 10 years. Okay, and what is next? What is next, guys? What's your guess? Let's assume all these new values that I always talk about here in those weekly energy tips and monthly forecasts and so forth. Let's assume all that is already going on. We're just a little slow in catching up with seeing it consciously. What's next, guys? What do you predict for the future? For the next 20-year cycle? What do you see? Yes, Kirk, I agree with you. From a spiritual point of view, creation's plan of evolution is beyond human comprehension. It is because human comprehension lives in that ego delusion. And the ego delusion does not allow you to understand what lies beyond itself. So ego cannot transcend itself. So from a human ego perspective, that's correct. From a human consciousness perspective, that's not correct. Because when you step into your consciousness, you actually understand creation's plan. You understand it's actually laid out already. It's not even mystical. Mm-hmm. Yes, we will find a new way of living together, sharing spaces Yes, absolutely, Annette. That is a big part of what is coming here in those next 20 years. So feel into this and think it through. What this means. Yeah, resource sharing, home sharing, smaller communities, collaborative initiatives, much more sort of non-profit oriented kind of things. Yes, and a lot more self-sustainability, exactly. Gardening, absolutely. Community, yes, Cindy. The next big subjects here for these 20 years are, of course, besides the technology that we've already illuminated that we will have to deal with. We'll have to deal with the dark side of, this sort of machinist, artificial intelligence idealization, okay? Artificial intelligence cannot reach anywhere close to the human consciousness, so you don't need to be worried about it. It's just that, we actually have to go through that, to fully leave it behind. But besides that are obviously, yes, food supply, resources, not just food, but everything in regards to resources that are needed for living. And many of you already know what I have decided to take on as my next project for my next 20 years. You guys know what this is. Education. Absolutely. Schools, education, training. The very thing that I'm already doing here for the last 15 years. For me, it's like a broken record. All right. Now, for me personally, the step is to train others. I have been doing this for the last 10 years already. But to train others, Yes, to mentor. Yes, to bring this awareness and a systematic way of learning this into, the collective. And how am I doing this? Practically, I'm doing this through creating my own school system, my own school infrastructure, my own curriculums and so forth. Just like how I've created energy courses, energy awareness trainings, energy sessions, all so that other people can learn this too. I train how to do this. I train all the steps. I break it all down. I have online courses for this. All this kind of work is always the same. Yeah, in order to inject this into the collective with the purpose of our consciousness developing. Yes, the whole community Janet, I'm reading what you're saying. The community thing has been happening for years, as well as the gardening and such. Yes, those are the forerunners. Just like how we have cryptocurrency forerunners, we have all kinds of forerunners. Energy healers are forerunners. Yes, they naturally form. And now this is our future. This will become our future. It's just that these new trends, they always have to go through a period of weeding out the darkness, of weeding out the delusion or the idealization as well. Yeah, so it started out as a really cool idea with communes and, all that, then turned into, this really dark sort of new age delusion. Okay, and you can see this in places such as Costa Rica, such as Mexico, such as other places in South America, and communes around the U.S. and Europe. Okay, that basically have developed into cults. All right, because they can't really sustain people without actually mind controlling them. So you have to understand that cults and cult thinking and mind control and propaganda and advertising is all the same. It all functions with the same paradigm, and even etheric abuse is. Except for etheric abuse requires a person to have a certain level of energetic and etheric training to direct this, let's say like with surgical precision, as someone like me and all the other beautiful energy workers that are out there have learned. Okay, and yes, there is a dark side to that as well. I've reported about this for many years. Yeah, so you really need to learn to discern that also with the energy healers and any kind of healer that you work with, if they even know what they're doing, yeah, and where they're getting this energy from. There are deceptions upon deceptions, guys, and there is a lot of deception on the etheric level, and I have produced lots of videos here talking about the battle of light and dark on this etheric level and what this actually looks like and what all this is about. But the best way of contextualizing this battle of the dark and the light is that you remember one thing. There only is one creation. Okay. So the dark, yeah, which is the absence of light, if you will, personified, yeah, formed its own entity, or was formed as an entity in order to lead people to the light. That's basically, the word Lucifer, right? Many of you are familiar with this. Is basically the story of the fallen angel that tried to create its own sort of kingdom, yeah, better than God's kingdom, so to speak, and lured people, into his kingdom, basically New Age is that way, the Luciferian. It's where people get lost, in the delusion, okay, as opposed to Ahriman, the other sort of satanic force that sits there and focuses you on your 3D existence only. It's like these two darknesses, and the light sits in between, and both of them basically were put into place, if you will, to help us with finding what? Finding the center, finding the middle, finding the light. And where do we find it? We find it in the center of it all. We find it in our heart. We find it in the Trinity, in the unification of the Divine Father, the Divine Mother, the Divine Child in us here on 3D. So it's all about harmonizing and unifying, and while these are sort of new agey words that were hijacked, okay, there is an energetic reality to that. So yes, we will continue having to go through this, but the larger developments, the larger collective developments here are that we recognize that we are indeed sort of energetic beings, and that this requires us to change, some things here in 3D. I don't think that there's a lot of people who will actually understand the spiritual dimension of that. It's not actually important, because we can, as humans, we can experience the difference between a lower vibratory and a higher vibratory state. And there is no doubt that, overcoming fears, overcoming pain, and really staying sane, developing sort of the stance of a heart warrior, that is one of our most popular programs, that is the way where it needs to go. We need to learn to stay sane within, our elevated awareness that allows us to see what is going on, because what is going on isn't funny. But we can see the larger perspective and our role in that, and in that stepping into our role, knowing what we're doing, so to speak. We are fulfilling, a larger karmic cycle, that of the human collective. So that concludes the discussion for these transition years from 22 and 23, with these developments here that you could already see in the last year's forecast. So it's basically part 2, to the zeitgeist list and the reality wars of 2021. 2022 will be basically the chaos of new, where we will step into a deeper understanding of all these things, such as mind control, war of perception, shocking revelations of truth, power struggle and public unrest, shadow government, new laws, antitrust, banking system crisis, surge of tech innovations, crypto, blockchain surge, new socialism, universal income, planetary shifts, new climate change research, local humanitarian crisis. I'm reading this off the list. First migration waves, new economic structure negotiations, spiritual awareness groups and rise of cults, energy health awareness and higher learning, new health awareness, corporate nations, new governments and governing powers. Those were all predictions that I did in December last year, and you will now gain a deeper understanding of all of this here in the course of this sort of global collective healing that we are experiencing together, and the energies that we have to deal with here, the opportunities and challenges that come in for us personally in our personal transformation process have to do with overcoming, all these old beliefs and mindsets. We'll see, things such as social engineering exposed, and we will basically experience a rewriting of history here in these next 2 years. Yeah, we will become more aware of this war of perception that I talk about and how this is playing out globally, also between the powers that be. Yeah, how these mind control and propaganda mechanisms work. We have to educate ourselves on that. Yeah, so growth always comes with a new way of understanding things, and that comes through education. We're going to personally be challenged to integrate all of this, this inner power awareness, to really walk the talk and not just sit on our couch and watch videos all day long, or read books, but to actually start embodying that, to bring ourselves into our higher expression, And we're going to have to step into a new level of inner and outer leadership, which means make more conscious choices and begin to consciously and more actively manifest the reality that we want to see. We need to learn how to truly inoculate ourselves, not through lazy-ass vaccines, that might or might not work. We need to inoculate ourselves from within, through the confrontation with untruth and fear, and yes, in regards to foods. This is only the tip of the iceberg, what we've experienced here in this last year, guys. There is if you want to talk conspiracy, there's a conspiracy in regards to foods and what we put into our bodies that is much older. Yeah, I know many of you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, these food additives and everything that comes out of this food production in our Western world is really messing with you. So that's why, this tendency toward more natural gardening and all that, hydroponics. Strongly recommend you guys to investigate these shipping container farms and stuff like that. It's wonderful, wonderful things. Those of you who were in Iceland with me and Jeff for the annual workshop, you've seen this, how this can look like and feel like. We've seen this in action. So in Iceland, there's a lot of momentum already in this direction. So we need to inoculate ourselves from within, and build power immunity from within on all levels of being, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Yes, and obviously we need to deal with, these resource wars that are coming now, where it's really about, fights over resources. These were always there, guys, but scarcity and lack is one of these fundamental fears, just like the fear of dying. It triggers it, and so we will willingly go into resource sharing and develop new activism around this, because we recognize that that's just a more effective and efficient way of doing things. Look at how much food is being thrown away, wasted every day. It's tons of food is being thrown away. I teach these children in our school, how long it takes for vegetables to grow and fruits to grow. And, do you really want to throw away that tomato? That just needed 3 months to grow into that little tomato. That's a lot of energy, a lot of resource. yeah, light from the sun, water from the rain, and nutrition through the soil that is being wasted there. Yeah, so with this is new awareness, and this has to happen with our children already. Yeah. This rising collective consciousness is still in a state of bifurcation. So bifurcation will be the reality here for the next 2 years. Still, it's the split reality, right? That's what bifurcation means, which means that the people are experiencing different versions of reality. Yeah, like in the Matrix movie. Yes, and the ratio is slowly shifting. So the way out of this is to develop a more practical approach to things, practical spirituality, and essentialism movement. Those are all things that you'll hear more and more. Higher learning, mindfulness, self-healing, and health. Those are obviously the topic that I have picked for the last 20 years. Actually, for the last 40 years. Ever since I was still in school, I started talking about, nutrition and health and all that. And then it evolved into energy healing. And now I'm at a point where I have lots of programs where people can systematically learn this and duplicate this. Yes, and what it means for us here in this world, trying to navigate through all this, is that we have to basically develop a new roadmap, a new inner compass. Yeah, how to do truth testing, how to do integrity testing. And this will happen, you'll see this on a collective level. In regards to companies, antitrust, and the questioning of how businesses should be conducted. Yeah, you'll see this already here in people choosing to opt out and not work for companies anymore, where they choose to become independent consultants, work remotely, and so forth. That's just the beginning, guys. All right, so antitrust is not just a legal word, it is also basically the characterization of these next 2 years. Yeah? That we learn to not trust, what is being spoon-fed to us, but that we actually go in and form these antidotes, as I called them last year, yeah, bit by bit, step by step, how we can navigate through all this with a functioning inner truth detector, yeah, that informs us about what is true to us. Yes, and Cindy, I would love to take your words here. Love, wisdom, and truth. Love, wisdom, and truth are these new values, guys. And so your job now, as these wonderfully conscious, awakened souls, yeah, is to bring those new values based on truth, love, and wisdom, yeah, which ultimately leads to freedom, into this 3D reality. So if you are overloaded and overwhelmed with all the tasks and so forth that are ahead of us, all you got to remember is, how can I bring more truth? How can I bring more love? How can I bring more freedom into my life? And then you'll see. You'll effortlessly get pulled into your higher expression, higher potential. It's not something you can seek. It is something that needs to happen, that needs to unfold. You just got to get yourself out of the way. And when I mean yourself, obviously I'm referring to your ego. Because your ego cannot see this yet. So don't use your ego to transcend something that you have already identified as blocking you. That won't work. Thank you, everybody. I will now move on to the forecast for week 1. But for that purpose, I am going to disconnect this call and start a new call, because from what I can see here, we have not been having any video. So I'm wishing you a wonderful transition into this new year, 2022. Go back to part 1, namely when I did the same forecast last year. Yeah, for 2021. It's still the same stuff going on, except for now you're seeing this with different eyes. And just out of curiosity, if I were you, I would do that, because now you have a much better understanding of what I was pointing your attention at a year ago, and maybe even all along the last 15 years since I'm writing articles and being vocal here on social media. Yes, share these links, share the videos, subscribe to YouTube, come to Skype for our daily online talks and meditations. Yeah, come to our Facebook group. Come to anything that you can trust, that you have already verified, that is based on truth and love and freedom. Yeah, and use that as your compass. Use that as your alignment here to navigate through the hardships, through the challenges and opportunities of this next year. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Subscribe to my email list if you want monthly energy alignments and weekly articles and reflections on these energies as we go through this together. Love you guys. Bye-bye.